My name is Francisco Valentin. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to be sharing a lifetime of spiritual experiences that I received throughout my whole life, starting from my death, near death, out of body, and channeling a group of ascended masters to help you better understand the spirit world as it is, without theological ties this time around. It all started one summer day, 1979, when at the tender age of barely turning 18, and due to a terrible car crash, I died. If you see the image of the car wreck, you can see as a point of reference how the driver's door ended up by the center console of the car and me with it. Up to this day, nobody knows how I survived, either by physics or by medical field. This is the way it happened. I was driving with my friends, returning from a trip before going to part our ways to go to college. And I have to admit, we were young and foolish. I was speeding. And when I was approaching my friends, as I was speeding, I lost control of my vehicle. I jumped the medium, falling to the opposite lane. I sidewiped another car, which made me spin. When I stopped spinning, another car hit me. This is my car. This is the other car. Hit me at the driver's side and me with it to my demise. And that's when I went into the void. When I mean the void, it's not the void out there in the cosmos. Today, I know that is the void within us. Where I was in this, what I've heard people saying, the black void, and it was black, pitch black. And I was there in the midst of that void without a physical body. I should point out that as I was in that void, I realized that I was myself. I was still myself. I didn't know that I had died, but I knew that I was consciousness. I didn't have a physical body. Neither I recall ever having a physical body. Neither that I was ever Francisco Valentin or anybody else. I was just pure consciousness. But I was afraid. I was confused. And I asked myself 3 questions. Who am I? Who's my father? And who's my mother? Today, I know that those 3 questions coming from a 18-year-old young boy today are, who am I? Where do I come from? What's my life purpose? What am I doing here? But none of those questions were answered that I know. At that point, I realized that there was a dim light approaching me. But I want to make sure you understand that when I say that I saw, it's not that I saw like you would see something with your physical eyes. People tend to say, well, those are your ethereal eyes. Not even that. It is just, there has to be a way for you to put into words what does not exist in the physical world. And because there's no exist and nothing to relate to, your perceptive human mind can only interpret that something to be cohesive with what you understand that is or is not. And in this case, the feeling of someone approaching me was interpreted as a dim light. Is, for example, in the black void, we know black as the absence of light, but it's not even that, it's just our interpretation. So based on that interpretation, I saw that dim light approaching me. As it approached me, I realized that it wasn't a light, but it was a group of beings that they were approaching me. And as they approached me, they start swirling around me in a counterclockwise direction. And as they swirled around me, I began to feel that I was bathed with peace and love, one that cannot be described here on earth. In fact, everybody that I have listened to, talked to, or read about who have had a near-death experience claim the same thing, a love that cannot be put into words, because even the closest description will fall short to that understanding of love and peace. Is, for example, unconditional love. You can put the love at different levels. Love for your parents, your lover, your children. And the top unconditional love is right here, but the love that I'm talking about goes beyond even the screen that we're sharing right now. As I felt this unconditional love, which cannot be described, I wanted to see who were they, the curiosity of the human mind, in this case, my ethereal life. I wanted to see what is this that is surrounding me while I was being bathed on this piece. The only way that I can explain is that if you are trying to see an object in movement, you go along with it as you move. And I did. And I saw perception, remember, I saw what could appear to be a face. But I know that it was an acknowledgement of me saying, I feel you, and that entity acknowledging it's present before me. At which point, I suddenly felt a presence so magnificent and powerful in a good way that it was overtaking all its surroundings like a dark cloud in a very, very sunny day. And as that presence that was overtaking everything got closer and closer, the next thing I remember was being taken into a funnel. And as I was into that funnel, it kept going narrower and narrower and narrower. And as it kept going narrower, I began to feel this incredibly body ache of the physical body, to the point that it became so unbearable that I took my first breath, opened my eyes, and that's when they were removing me from my vehicle. The story is very extensive as to what happened afterwards. But to ease your curiosity, what happened at a physical level is that I had multiple fractures in my pelvic bone, broken ribs, a metal strip from the door panel split, and it launched into my rib cage. It punctured and collapsed my lung. It shattered my spleen beyond repair, and it punctured my kidney. Other than that, I have multiple internal bleeding. And to give you a point of reference, the accident took place at 4 p.m. and I was removed from my car at approximately 6 p.m. How do I know that? Because I know that it was around 4 p.m. before the accident. And when they took me out of my car on a summer day, it was already getting dusk. So I knew, and I had a point of reference. That means that I must have been dead for 2 hours. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it to the hospital because of the internal bleeding. And I was taken to the hospital, then transferred to another hospital because of the severity of my injuries. And I went into surgery at 9 p.m. After surgery, I was on an intensive care unit for 3 days, a month before I was released from the hospital after complications. And when I tried to explain what happened to me on the other side, I was shut down by my family, my friends, society, culture, my religion. I was born and raised Catholic. As I tried to explain, to give you an example, what happened to me, someone told me, why don't you go to the priest? He might help you. So I did. Being a Catholic, I went to the priest. I went into the confessionary. I did what I had to do, and I cleared what happened. And what I remember was the priest telling me to do, I don't know how many Hail Marys and the Lord's Prayer. And I said, what did I do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. Why I've been punished? The only person that truly listened to me was my mother, who told me that when she saw me at the hospital before going to surgery, the only thing that I kept claiming nonstop was how beautiful it was on the other side, that I didn't want to come back. That I don't remember, but I trust my mother. At that point, after I was shut down, I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to keep it to myself and take it to the grave. So I thought, hear me now. And I kept on with my life. I read all the books that I could get a hold of, trying to find that spark that will help me understand what took place, because I was too young to understand. Neither my upbringing and my religious belief didn't comply with what I saw and what I experienced. So I took one book and I go, no, that's not it. I took another one, no, that's not it. And another one, yes, no, yes, no. Why? Because I needed to find that answer that I didn't get because of lack of understanding. So here's lesson number one. Don't believe everything that you read. Now, keep in mind that we're talking about 1979, that there was no internet. The libraries, public library were very, very limited in a Spanish culture in Puerto Rico. And the access that I have was very limited. So I kept on with my life. I got married. I became a professional in insurance industry. I raised 3 beautiful children. And my whole life was good and dandy until one day. That day was July 7, 2011, when a spirit of light manifested through my 20-year-old boy son at the time to remind me of an agreement that took place in 1979 in return for my life. In other words, my 20-year-old at the time went abruptly, out of nowhere, went into a spiritual trance, and the spirit of light spoke through him to remind me of an agreement that took place in 1979 in return for my life. Reason now I know why I don't remember after that presence and then being in the tunnel. Something happened between that time that I wasn't allowed to remember. And seems like I totally forgot, and I had to be reminded of that agreement that took place. So the spirit of light, before giving me that agreement or that reminder, it answered all those questions that I had and I asked at that time, those questions that I never got a straight answer from humanity. And before it left, it granted me what I learned to call higher truth, so I can finish my lifelong quest and begin my work. And when that higher truth manifested in me, it was like a life review. For those who don't know what a life review is, that people claim that when you die, you are going to be seeing your life at all levels and you're going to be judged as such. It's not so. It is you who judge yourself because you are aware now of those wrongdoings or good deeds or whatever. In my case, while I'm still alive, I got those sparks of memory recalls, not as the doer, but the observer, because the doer only sees what he wants to see and experience what can only be perceived by his mind at the time. But when you are the observer, you are from outside looking at the whole picture, all the scenery, and then you can understand things that you didn't understand before. And to give you an example, the first memory recall granted me access to understand that, yes, in 1979, yes, indeed, I died. Then a second life review made me realize that in the year 2000, my mother, who was dying of a brain tumor, was diagnosed that the brain was not receiving any oxygen and she was going to die within a few hours, but that never happened. My mother was convulsive from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. nonstop to wake up and finish those unsolved issues. And 30 days later, she died, but not from the brain tumor, but from asphyxiation. And that was a lesson for me to understand that there is divine intervention. But I didn't see it at the time because I was too involved with the earthly plane. And the reason why I'm saying this and I'm sharing this with you, because many of us go through the experience similar to that, and they take them as just something that cannot be explained and not seen as the observer, but as the doers. Then that memory recalled reminded me that in the year 2002, I had a near-death experience myself. when I wake up one morning and I open my eyes and I saw everything that was white, like a veil. And as I closed my eyes, the same thing was happening. I was still seeing the veil. When my body started detaching from my physical to my ethereal, to give you an analogy that you may easily understand, is like imagine that I have a balloon in this hand full of air and another balloon here without air. And if I put them together and I open the valve to transfer the air from one to the other, that similar was the transition. But because I was there before, I felt myself at peace and ready to move on. When suddenly, very, very far away, I can hear someone say, "No, you cannot do this to me. You cannot leave me." And that was my lovely wife. And whatever was taking me, just let me go. And I went back into consciousness. And that was for me to learn how perception works, how the perceptive mind works. And that I explained later on my lectures. Another life review showed me that in the year 2010, a prophecy was given to me. While I was meditating, I was drawn into a swirl. And when I touched bottom, an inner voice told me, from now on, you're not going to learn from outside sources. And everything moving forward will be learned from within. And when I woke up, I realized what was happening, but couldn't understand. But that was for me to learn that prophecies do exist and that there was something that needed to be completed, finished, or fulfilled. What was prophesied in 2010 came to pass on July 7, 2011, when my 20-year-old son at the time, Spirit of Light, manifested through his sons, through his voice, to remind me of an agreement that took place. The following day, I woke up with this urge to write. I'm not a writer. I don't even like writing, but I was compelled to write. And when I opened my laptop and started typing, I realized that I was transcribing verbatim, word by word, what took place the night before, which was the event that took place with the Spirit of Light. I do not have that kind of memory. Neither I can recall everything as perfectly as I did. So let's call it automatic writing. And the following days after that transcription took place, I began to wake up between 1 and 3 a.m. to download information that was so perfectly understood, but so complex for many. And it was all about the origin and the purpose of life, with something different from what I've read or seen everywhere else, which is that the message was coming forward without theological ties this time around. So as I was waking up between 1 and 3 a.m., I kept downloading that information, at which at one point I asked, who are you? What am I doing here? Am I channeling? Is this channeling? And if you were to be channeling, you want to know who you're channeling, right? So I asked, who are you? And this is the response that I receive. Name calling limits the source through reasoning. Rather say that it comes from the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. Now, let me help you out with this kind of awkward, weird way of saying things. So those ascended masters, what they were telling me was that name calling limits the source through reasoning. That means that if I am the source and I give myself a name, let's say, for instance, Archangel, whatever name you want to give, I am the source. And by me calling myself an Archangel, whatever, I am limiting myself because of the reasoning that you will have if I were to talk about reincarnation. So to avoid that limitation on the information that comes forward, they rather be called the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. Why the collective forces? Because it's more than one. And I learned to recognize one from the other based on their personalities and way of delivering the message. Further down the road, I kept transcribing all that information as I kept learning little by little everything that I'm bringing forward for humanity to read. Today, I am the transcriber for a group of collective forces of ascended masters, better known as the collective forces of knowledge and wisdom. And I ask, so how am I going to call this information? And the image that I received was a parchment. And through my feeling, I understood that it was a very, very old parchment, old as all can be, as old as beyond any religion, beyond the gods that we know, even beyond time itself. And the word transcript came about. So that's what I call transcript. Now, for those who wonder, because I missed this part, for those who wonder, how do I know that there was an agreement? What happened was that my 20-year-old son at the time, as he went to a spiritual trance, and I approached the room, he said, "Dad, listen, I can see orbs all around me, but we're one." And he has his eyes closed while saying those words. And I goes toward him and I said, what do you mean? And he said, I mean, we're one. And that's when his voice turned unemotional. And I thought that he was giving me a prank. So I start asking, what do you mean we are one? And he replies, we are one. And then I start asking questions, trying to get him off balance to see if he finally will say, oh, that was a prank. But it didn't happen. And as I kept asking different questions, I kept receiving the same answer. And it got to the point that when I was formulating the questions on my head, I didn't even finish formulating the question in my head when I started receiving the answer. And that bugged the heck out of me. And that's when I I said, so what am I doing here? And that's when my son stood up, turned towards me, opened his eyes, and very energetically he said, don't you remember that you and I agreed for me to come down for you to help me do my job? Then he closed his eyes, turned around, sat down, and began to move his head rhythmically. After that event, I asked my son, do you remember what happened? And he said, yes, I do remember everything. How do you remember? And he replied, I remember as if I has always known, which explains that we haven't forgotten. It's just that it had been put aside because of lack of support. Then I asked, well, do you remember also when you stood up and you opened your eyes and you told me, no, I don't remember. I actually don't. So imagine how much energy that spiritual being must have had to take away my son out of the picture, to cover his body, stand up, open his eyes, give me this message or this reminder, close his eyes, sit down, and allow my son to come back. That also helped me understand that there is spirit communication with the spirit world. Today, I'm the transcriber of those transcripts. I have a webpage titled thetranscripts.org, which you can go and visit my page, and you can download the first transcript, which is available for all humanity to read. All you got to do is sign up. And if you sign up to receive every Sunday the latest weekly transcript, you will automatically receive the first transcript, which was the first message that I received in terms of our true origin and purpose on life, but in a way that I could understand at that moment. Further transcripts are more complex as you keep learning higher truth. And the question is, what is higher truth? Well, higher truth is one step at a time, learning one truth after the other just to get to the ultimate truth. It's like math. First, you need to learn how to count numbers, to then add and subtract, to then multiply and divide before you can understand algebra. That is higher truth. One step at a time until you get to the ultimate truth. Do I have the ultimate truth? Not necessarily, but that's something that you will like to know while you read the transcript. So this is my story in a nutshell. There's a lot more that I can talk about, but time is limited. So I invite you to go to my webpage, thetranscript.org, and subscribe so you can have a higher truth and you can transcend one step at a time. That's all for today. I thank you for sharing time with me, and I hope to see you at the transcript.org. Thank you.